If you want to do where you work at or where you. Hey there, everybody. Appreciate y'all coming out to hear us talk today. This one's going to be a fun one for me because I don't think I've ever really talked about a lot of my experiences when I worked at Diebold and prior to that too with Scott. But the people you see here are mentors, peers, and people that I owe my career to in many cases. And so I thought it'd be good as a good closing Derbycon to talk a little bit about our experiences and what we were able to accomplish and how we were successful in what we were doing. And I think you'll see a common theme between all of this is that we had a lot of fun doing it, and we built a team that had a lot of fun doing it. And I look back at those days as some of the best days of my life. Literally, the reason why Derbycon is here today is because Scott at the time was the chief security officer. I think it was regional security officer or something at the time. And I came to Scott with a crazy idea, and I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about starting this conference in Louisville, Kentucky. You think that's okay? He's like, yeah, just don't tell it's corporate communications, and it'll be fine. And he's like, okay, I'll go start it up. And so you'll kind of see and navigate through some of the stories that we've been through. But this is Jess Walpole, Kevin Baker, and Scott Angelo. But I figured they'd do a brief introduction themselves. But these folks were instrumental in my career and kind of kicking off. And some of the funny stories that we had, but also what we were able to do and how we were able to do it, I think can paint a really good picture around how people can be successful in their own careers and how you can leverage things that we've learned and the hardships that we've gone through to really improve what you're doing here and what's going on with information security. So with that, I'll kick it over to Jess. Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, Jess Walpole from I guess I'm at Lincoln Electric. So I serve as the Vice President of Global IT Security and Infrastructure Operations. I've had the pleasure of knowing these guys for the last 14 years. And it's been a great journey, so I appreciate the fact that Dave had asked us to come and do this too with him.
Before you give it to Kevin real quick, I got to share a story quick. So Jess was the person, no, I did. This is good, it's a good story. Jess was the person that you always wanted to have in your back pocket for when something went wrong. A quick example of this really quick, and it's one of my favorite stories of Diebold, is that one of their main web applications at the time was Ceres, and it had a lot of managed services for our customers. And at the time, I found a blind SQL injection flaw in it, and I accidentally did a loop which erased everybody's passwords in the entire database. I'd only been working there for maybe a month or so, and I get a call from the main developer of Ceres, and they're like, "Hey, are you working on something with Ceres right now? Because all of our customers are out, and it's like literally an outage of our entire company." I'm like, "Maybe." And the first thing I did is I picked up the phone and I called Jess. I'm like, "Jess, I really messed up, and here's what happened." And I locked everybody out. And she's like, "Okay, well that exposure shouldn't have been there in the first place. Let's go figure out how we can get it fixed." And that was kind of the mentality of working with people and having her working with me and being able to dig me out of a lot of troublesome issues that I had when I going through that career was amazing. So.
I'm Kevin Baker, and I'm kind of concluding a career as a CISO at Westfield Insurance, and I'm retiring, but not really. And I'm going to go and direct something called Insurance Shield, which is a hybrid ISAL for insurance agents. So I'm going from the clueful to the clueless and try and accomplish the same things.
Hi, I'm Scott Angelo, and at one point or another, I hired all three of these, or pulled them out of roles that they were kind of buried in, and gave them opportunities. So I'm the one that can tell you how to go from, I started out as an intel officer, went into industrial security, and worked the first half of my career as a security expert, or expert's a relative term. I was never an expert, but I became a CIO. And those are some of the things that I want to share, because I believe that security practitioners that's the best route to becoming a CIO. So we can talk about that too.
So I'll kick it off with my very first interaction with Scott Angelo here, which I think would be a good one. Scott hired me. This is a really, really interesting one. This is a long time ago, by the way, so older Dave is much more mature than younger Dave was at the time, okay?
It was months ago.
It happened last week. But Scott hired me out of the military to join a company at the time called Secure State. And it was a small consulting shop at the time. And I think, man, when I joined, I was maybe 5 or 6 employees or something like that. It was relatively small. And what excited me about them was it got me early on in penetration testing. And I didn't have a lot of communication skills. I didn't like going in front of people. I just liked the technical focus and actually, coding and figuring things out. And that's where I learned a lot from Scott on hey, there's more to just life than just getting there and breaking stuff, which I still like to break stuff, but I also like talking about breaking stuff, which is cool. And so one day, and I don't know why this happened, but there was 2 owners at the time, and Ken and Scott. And Ken was like, hey, you should go mess with Scott. And we start talking about what we're going to do to mess with Scott. And I'm like, well, I'll just go into his office in my boxers, which I thought would be fun. I'd been working there for like 2 weeks. And so Scott's on the phone, and he's on an important phone call, and I sit down, and I'm in my boxers. And, he doesn't know I'm there. He's got his feet kind of kicked up in the back and everything. And he turns around, because I make a little noise, and he turns around, and he's on the phone. He's like, and and it was one of those things where I was like, oh, I messed up. And Scott wouldn't talk to me for 2 weeks. So I was really sweating. I'm like, am I going to lose my job? That was pretty, in the Marines, that was normal. Like, he could walk into somebody's office in boxers anytime and it'd be perfectly fine. But, civilian life a little bit different. I had literally just gotten out of the Marine Corps. And so Scott comes to me 2 weeks later, and he's like, hey, sorry I've been ignoring you for 2 weeks, but I've been trying to understand what I've ever said to you that wanted to make you come into my office in your boxers. And he's like, I want to ensure that never happens again. I was like, listen, man, we're on the same page. I'm not ever going to show into your boxers ever again. I think I did a couple years later, but aside from that, it never happened again. So, the reason I want to tell that story is that it was a lot of fun where I worked at, right? And it was a lot of fun when I left Secure State to go to Diebold. And even though I was working for a Fortune 1000 company, I had so much to learn from people around me. And the most important thing that I can relate to is that, I didn't know everything. I didn't know how to communicate or navigate the ropes of Diebold's political system, or the architecture and infrastructure of how it was designed, or how to talk to executives, or even be able to interface them in any way. And I basically was a sponge from everybody around me to learn everything that I possibly could. And I'll talk a little bit more about the program, but I think that's a good starting point of just how we all leverage each other to kind of build a program.
Yeah, it has been a journey. It was exciting. I know when Scott joined Diebold in 2006. I can remember the very first time I saw his email and what his demands were, and I thought, oh God, what have we gotten ourselves into with this one? But it's been a really interesting journey. And at the time I was just doing finance, and I wondered, why would I ever get into security? But it was really a situation that was back in the days when Sarbanes-Oxley had been big, and I didn't really know too much about that, but I had been involved with it, obviously. And for some reason, he thought that I was the right fit, and he had already pulled Kevin into the mix, and we had another person in the team. But going from an organization where it was literally the start for the security program, and then quickly over 36 months, bringing in 30 different individuals into the IT security arena, and getting the opportunity to not only do IT security, but also product security and OPSEC, and learning how to navigate budget aspects and, to your point, political. I think it was a great in Denver. And I know I look back on that time, and I do it again in a minute, and I also wonder why I would do it again in a minute. Because there were a lot of long nights and a lot of challenging aspects associated with it.
Yeah, I think what we would really like to be able to give you today is, just a taste of our experience, because the time in which we lived in and the state of the industry at the time that we began, for me it was like 2003 and 2004. It was, we were there for, the first internet banking sites, the first ATM jackpots, the first exploits that truly we would have assumed that a company as large as what we worked with would have had a whole lot more than what they had. And my experience there was that I was working in the fledgling security department that wasn't called a security department. You know what that means? The guys that just work over there in the dark, right? And it was killing me. I mean, I felt like I was fighting, whipping the tide to keep it from coming in. No hope that there would ever be any level of success, and if maybe you've tasted a little bit of that, but they brought in Scott Angelo for some strange reason. I don't know how that happened, but when he came in, he began to articulate a version of doing information security which suddenly seemed doable to me. Whereas I felt like I was drowning. We're never going to make any progress. Here someone came in with some actually very simple concepts and a way to articulate them that I thought, yeah, I'm not going to bail, because I had been a heavy equipment operator and I was really thinking about going back, But when I heard Scott and the way he began to talk about information security, I thought, okay, that makes sense. I think this is doable. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey in really taking on the desire to be an information security professional. And then, of course, he said, you got a year to get your CISSP.
All right, those are really good stories. And I actually did consider stripping down to my boxers during this presentation, but figured I'd probably get fired from my current job because someone would post it. But, I've been in this business for over 30 years. I know I don't look it. I'm much younger than, but anyways, I've been very, very fortunate. Early on, and I think these are all key things, right, that I'm about to say. Early on, I was unbelievably blessed with having two incredible mentors that taught me a lot about security, and didn't have necessarily anything to do with technical security, just about protecting things. And they talked to me about also, if you really want to provide value to your organization, you will learn the business of that organization. Because if you don't, you will always be suboptimal to some degree. And unless you learn the business, you're never going to be able to speak the language. You know, because technical folks, whether you're security, you know, it doesn't matter, engineer, analyst, developer, you do speak a different language than the people that are running the business. And it's not their job to learn your language. It's your job to learn theirs. And that's not for everyone. So I think that's the first thing you got to, and I've taught that to every one of these individuals at one point. If you don't, that's okay. You don't have to learn their language, and you can be good at what you do, but you will be limited. And that's okay, because we need people that just want to be engineers or analysts or developers and things. And you can be the best, and you always should. And that's another thing that I always look for. And I would say I was very fortunate, and there was a lot of luck in just seeing someone, they weren't necessarily doing security, and I'd pick them out of that, and I'd put them in a role, and I'd challenge them to be the best that they could, right? So I learned that early, because once you learn the business, now you can play in the gray area. And there's not a whole lot of, there's not optimal value in just working in black and white. It's really getting into the gray area, coming up with compensating and mitigating type of solutions that will help the business do what they want to do. And you only do that by really learning the business, and in essence, learning the language of the business. So over 30 years, I've been fortunate to build 5 very large programs in 4 different industries. The first program I built was at NASA Special Projects. Totally different. And, you know, that's when I had to put all these things together. Oh, and how am I going to learn this business? Because the area that I was in was, they basically were rocket engineers. And I'm like, I got to try to figure out to at least understand as much as I can. Successful program. Then I went on to DARPA and built their very first information security program. Used the same principles. Left and went into consulting because I wanted to get into commercial, and I wanted to test out some theories. I wanted to make sure that the things that I had learned in the military and in the government would be applicable. I thought they were. And then I came into, I'm not going to bore you, but that's when I went to Diebold. And Diebold is where I made the transition. I was hired in as their very first CISO. Pardon me? Then I became the CSO. And then I got to the whole thing about getting to the board, and we always talk about getting to the table. Getting to the table is hard. Staying at the table is even more difficult. And I stayed at the table, and they made me the CIO. And I said, I've never been a more effective security practitioner than I am as a CIO, because now I can enforce that across the board. So I don't want to belabor that, but then I went into different industries. The other key thing that I want to, learning the business, right? The second thing is, there is no such thing as one size fits all, and because each business is different. You have to understand the business economics, and that means their finance, right? Because understand the money, how that organization generates money. You have to understand the industry, because every industry is different. You have to understand the organizational setup. There's a difference between a regional organization than there is a global organization. So there are a lot of different components. And again, that's all about learning the language. And the last thing I'll say before we go back, and then obviously I'll get back into this, is I often hear, well, they say no. And one of the things I think everyone always says to me when I come into a new organization, now about the 6-month point, how did you get them to agree to these things that none of your predecessors were able to? And the first thing was, it was learning their language and not giving them the ability to say no. Because no is an option, and you have to understand that, right? No is an option. But if I'm trying to describe an option to you and I'm speaking a different language, I gave that executive an opportunity to say no, because he had no idea what I was talking about. So that's the last thing I'm going to say about understand and learn the business just as much as you're perfecting and honing your very specific technical skill. Take the time to understand what a P&L is, a balance sheet. And I'm telling you, that will advance your opportunities inside of any organization, and you'll find that that will allow you to go into other industries and have the same success.
Do you totally remember him saying we were not allowed to say no?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, I learned a lot of creative ways of saying yes.
Yeah.
I didn't say no, I said that no is an option.
One thing I'll say about Scott, and he's very humble in talking about this, but I literally owe where my career is today to Scott. Like, Scott literally taught and mentored me, and that's a sign of a good leader, where he'll take the time to teach you, to train you, to know when you have talent or not. And when I came out of the military, I was just a kid out of the military that no one knew Dave Kennedy. There was no Derbycon. There was no social engineer toolkit. There was no PowerShell at the time. None of that stuff had happened yet. And really, when my career really started taking off was 100% under Scott. And if you look at my PowerShell research that Josh Kelly and myself presented at DEF CON, even Dave DeSimon, we did the SCCM hacking with DEF CON, when we started Derbycon, all that stuff happened when Scott enabled me as a person to go and do it. And at the same time, I'm learning the way to communicate to people. I eventually became the chief security officer and took Scott's spot over at Diebold and ran their security program. Chief information security officer. Was our chief security? I don't remember. I was one of them. But ran their program for a while until I decided to start Trusted Tech. And one thing I can say is that what we were able to accomplish during those periods of time as a team is a testament to that leadership. And one of the things that I just wanted to give you an example of is that I remember walking in one day and Scott was going to present to the board. And it was my first time presenting at the board. And I'll tell another story about the board here in just a second, you a-holes that covered my car up. But anyways, other than that, the one time I went to go present to the board, I said, Scott, what do you want me to present on? And he's like, I just want you to be you there. I want them to know that I have somebody like you there so that they trust everything that I'm doing when I go up there and I talk to them. I don't know if you remember that or not. But I went up there and I was talking a bunch of stuff that they had no idea what I was talking about. I was like, oh, we're getting threats from here. And I made a joke about Canada because we had ArcSight at the time. And so there, you could see like this little pew-pew map, right? And you'd see like where the attacks were coming from. And during the NHL hockey timeframes, we had 0 attacks originate from Canada. And so I remember that one was pretty good. I always used that joke for a while. And the executives loved it. And they like, man, it's awesome you have these types of folks in your team. And so Scott was able to leverage, people in his team and trust people in his team to go and do things. He knew when I was doing something. I remember one time, and Jess, by the way, was phenomenal for shielding me for a lot of the stuff that I did. But I remember one time we were implementing ScanSafe, and ScanSafe was taking a long time to deploy, a lot longer than I wanted to. It was like we were like a month into it, which I know for a Fortune 1000 company is not long, but I was really impatient. And I wanted to be the first company really that I knew of to block all egress ports, period, including 80443, across our entire perimeter. Everywhere, right? In a month, right? And so, sounds doable, right? Fortune 1000 company, across the globe, we'll do it, right? So we had all the ports done except 80443. And at the time, there were these, they're called ScanSafe beacon servers. And the beacon servers would be deployed in your network, and then what would happen is your machines would then communicate to these beacon servers and then go out to the internet over whatever port you wanted to. So it'd be like a web proxy, but then you could block 80443. And so I go up to at the time it was Mark Couric, and I'm like, hey, I went to Scott Schaefer at the time. I went with Scott was there, and I went to Scott Schaefer. I'm like, hey man, can you find an RFC that kind of sounds like this? And he's like, an RFC that sounds like blocking 18443 across the entire company. He's like, that's gonna break the shit out of everything. I'm like, yeah, but it won't be that bad, right? I mean, it's not gonna be like can you just find like an RFC and tuck it there? And if you get in trouble, I'll just take the blame for it, and I'll take all the heat, right? I was like, I just made you do it. And he's like, nah, man, it's too risky for me. Sorry. So then I went to Mark, who's my good friend in telecom at the time. I'm like, hey, Mark. I'm like, hey, can you find a same speech? Like, can you find an RFC? He's like, man, that's gonna break everything. And I'm like, it's not gonna be that bad. He's like, oh, it's gonna be bad. I'm like, well, just figure it out. And so I went to Jess, I went to Scott. I'm like, hey, I'm about to do this thing really quick, and it's probably gonna break most of the company, but we're gonna be way better off when we do it. And I don't think it's gonna be that bad. And so they're like, all right, go for it. And so we found an RFC, we tucked it underneath there, and we got it done. It broke our entire production line for our ATMs at the time, but it was only for like an hour, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And so no one was actually really upset, and we actually got it all implemented. We had no egress ports going out our entire company. And that was like some of the fun and relationships, but the working relationship we had with IT was absolutely phenomenal. Like, I mean, the folks would go and patch things we needed to. I'd buy them beer and pizza all the time for all the things that I would ask them to do. Like, man, that's not going to go good. I'm like, it'll be fine. But it worked out. It worked out really well. We were able to implement a lot of change really quick. And the difference was, at the end of the day, I knew I had a leadership team that would back me for what I was doing. And at the end of the day, I knew that he had the full support of our CEO at the time, Tom Swidarski. And Tom's like, do whatever you need to do to secure a company, and I don't care what it takes. And that comes from leadership, from a team that you know you can trust, and to be able to pull things off like that and not get fired because you're destroying an entire company overnight by accident. It was an accident. I was changing SQL SA passwords in prod. When I found like a weak SQL password in prod. I'm like, that's getting changed right now. We'll change that. Put up in a ticket. If anybody complains about it, we'll figure it out. It's one of those types of deals. And we knocked through a lot of legacy stuff very quickly. Mainframe, same thing, knocked them out quickly. Overall environment architecture design, knocked out really quick. You started to find different areas, centralizing our infrastructure from being globally kind of dispatched to multiple locations to one location. I mean, we did it all so fast. I mean, it was a span of what? How many years? 2 years? 3 years? 2 years. 2 years we did all of that, and it was incredible. Good journey. I don't know if you have anything to add to it, but all the trouble I got you in, but.
I'm just going to say, for my team that's here, we're not doing this. So, I don't remember a lot of that, but I do remember there was a lot of different changes, and maybe it was also because of the fact that, as amongst this going on, we also had, it was very interesting because I think when Scott came on board and when we were first looking at our program, it was really focused on enterprise security, which we thought that was kind of cool. All right, so we're going to get to do enterprise security for this organization. But the interesting part was it quickly switched to product security and solution security and OPSEC security. And I think we all had to learn quickly how to continue to morph. And this probably drives my team crazy because it's constantly that morphing aspect. So thank you, Scott. But I think it was a matter that we just learned how to adapt quickly to what was going on in the environment, what was important to the business. And in doing such, we were able to change the program from being focused on just enterprise security, whether it was for compliance and regulatory aspects and the things that you just need to do to be a publicly owned company, to something that actually was a market differentiator for our organization. It was exciting to be able to start working on solutions where we had to do things around, NIST compliance for government contracts. We had to support FFIEC. We all know how the financial industry is. Looking at those components, building out the right types of programs, and amongst that, having the security concerns that you would have over not just the enterprise, but also over the product set. I'm not going to steal the thunder about our ATMs. I'll let you do that one. But I think it's interesting to go through that process. And then at the end of at least my career, I think the most exciting part, and I know you were a key part of it, and what Dave was able to build from the security standpoint to have the level of reliance on it was to be able to help in the selling process associated with those products.
Just 1 second. The thing to add to that is that we became a reliance on the company to sell their product. And so security became a driver across our entire organization where we were a huge differentiator in the ATM space. And we won some of our largest deals in Diebold history because of our security program. And when you can do something like that, everybody listens to security and listens in a positive way. You're not the folks that are stopping. And we were really cool with everybody. I mean, like, we'd work with our software development folks. We wouldn't just shut things down. We wouldn't, be that kind of draconian type of mentality. We were very much open with our teams, and we were known as the fun group. Like, we had Nerf guns, and we wear jeans we're not supposed to, and do all these things that you're trying to change kind of a culture for one. I remember one time, one of the EVPs, what was his name? The EVP over operations, really big guy.
Oh, George Mays.
George Mays. George Mays was coming by. And George Mays was coming by, and we were having a Nerf gun war, and accidentally shot George Mays, who was an executive vice president, in the side of his shoulder. And he's a really big guy. Like his hands are like 4 times the size of mine. And he says, "Dave, if you shoot me again, I'm gonna crush your skull." I'm like, fair enough, George. It's cool. And you know, it was a really fun environment. But the thing about it is security was really well received throughout the entire business.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that the period of time that we're in, when all these things were happening, we also met some really interesting people from the Secret Service. You know, things went wrong. You know, things that were easy to get away with from a security perspective in the 90s, in the aughts. Not so much. You know, Diebold used to sell transaction processing software. And so they sold this software with the assumption in the shared responsibility model, as they call it today, that the people that they sold this to, the community banks, the small banks, they would say, okay, we've set this thing up. You can drive your ATMs with it, and here's your encryption keys. And they would put it in a folder. The SEs, the systems engineers, would put it in a folder on the customer's environment. And the name of the folder was, "Here's your encryption keys." Right? So as long as there was no connection to the outside world, you could get away with things like that. It was security by obscurity. But once these small community banks started having internet banking sites and internet presence, people started hacking them in and finding all the things that perhaps we had not done right. So incidents began to happen, bad incidents, and you know, we learned a lot the hard way. We had foreign data centers. You know, I ended up being security manager for global services, so there are 13 places in the world where we had data centers that provided managed services to ATM networks. And so I would have to go to all these places. But the first place I went was China, and it was in an incident response. On one of our websites had been defaced by a group of hackers that said, basically, if I remember right, you need to patch your website, right? So so Scott introduced me, and I think I'd met him a couple times before, this young man who was going to go with me, and he was going to be the guy who did the technical stuff, which was David, and we went to China, you know, and I grew up believing if you went to China, you know, they might take you on the street and shoot you, you know. I mean, it was a very strange thing for me to be in a communist country. It's not the same as it is today. You know, in 2006 and 7, it was very different. So David and I took a trip and found out that there was another hacker underneath those hackers, and he was like a hair's breadth away from the mainframe at the home office. And we had to respond to that incident. So we go there, and they lose our luggage.
I saw the luggage story.
Yeah, yeah. So we check into the hotel, and there's a Foracar, that French Target, behind the hotel. And we go in there. We got to buy, you know, T-shirts and underwear and toothbrushes. And we go in. Nobody speaks English there, right? And so you go in, you make the international sign for toothbrush, right? And oh yeah, and these, they were leading us around the store, and we were getting stuff. So I'm going back in this aisle, and this little girl, woman, looked like a little girl to me. She's pointing up to something. I look at this product, and it's for hair loss. So I go, Dave, you totally got to come here. She's got a product for you. Yeah. So we do that. We get the toothbrush, and we go to buy underwear. Well, you know, let me tell you something. An extra large pair of underwear in China is like a small pair of underwear here. So we talk kind of like this for a couple of days, you know. But
Real quick on that. He's not exaggerating. I was Big Dave then, so I was 300-pound Dave. And I had to cut the sides of the underwear out just so my legs could
it may have become like a fashion statement.
It might have been a fashion. I started a fashion statement of tighty-whitey things that I had to cut in the side. So it was bad.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, I wanted to tell those little lighter stories to let you know that you know, relationship is more important to you than you may realize. I work with college students all the time in universities all the time, trying to get them to move people into a sane education that gets them value for their education. Value for your education. See, people come out of college, they say, you need to bring value to my company, but you know, really, we got to bring value to these people for their education. And that means you're supposed to drink that. Yeah. You're supposed to drink that. Yeah. Like, look at these relationships. We haven't worked at the same company in years, and yet we are resources for one another. Jess and David and Scott have helped me with the company where I'm at right now and helped me to make me successful. You know, it's Crow. It's real. Yeah, that's the stuff. That's the stuff. That's the stuff. It's warm. They warmed it up for you. Yeah.
I saw last night them pull something out of a lemon that wasn't open, so I want to make sure this was.
Yeah.
Just warm Smirnoff Ice.
So while you're doing that, remember that what you have to bring to the company you work for is more than the technical pieces that you have. Those are really important things, but if you can't communicate them to other people, and there must be 100 careers inside information security. It doesn't matter what you do, but you can fit in. But let me tell you this, what you're doing now is not what you're going to be doing in 5 years. So don't build your life like what you're doing right now is what you're always going to be doing. You'll be lucky if it lasts 3 years, and then you're going to be doing something else. Which way was this going?
So I think what's interesting in this is I'm starting to realize that you guys had a lot of fun breaking stuff. And I feel like I had to do a lot of explaining and marketing. No, we're not telling the market story. No. So, and with that, I mean, I think what's interesting is that I still use a phrase from you that I know my team hates, which is the fantastic chicken or the pig coming to the table story. And there were aspects of you that I had to go through and explain to regulators as to why I trusted him, because they were afraid that he would go rogue any day.
Real funny story on that. So we were going through an FFIEC examination, and one of the guys there was talking about, you know, some of our examinations and stuff like that. And I'm like, listen, this is all fun, but I really am I have an unreleased version of the social engineer toolkit. Do you want to see that? And he's like, yeah, I would like to see that. So I just did a demo of a set while I'm like literally talking to this FFIEC regulator, and he's like, this is the coolest thing ever. And then she got the question of like, how do you know when he's going to go rogue? Because I'm scared of that guy. So.
Unintended
Yeah.
consequence.
Yeah,
Unintended consequence.
yeah, because it was a situation. I mean, I think that was probably the real turning point, at least for me, when we go through and we do all the documentation. Thank you, Jeff. If you need documentation, Jeff Pershing, amazing. But the reality is that we had developed all this documentation, pulled it all together, getting all things done, putting in a little bow, putting the frosting on it, and then afterwards they'd come to me and they say, well, we need to talk to you just for 5 minutes. And I'm like, okay. And it needs to be a private conversation. Okay. And, you go upstairs and like, well, first off, we just want to let you know that we've never seen this before. Never. Secondly, we don't know what to do here because we're used to us teaching people and you're teaching us stuff here. And then the last one was, Dave, what am I going to do about him? So, but I mean, to be able to be in that kind of a situation and know that in 36 months, developing that program, bringing on this type of talent, and also learning how to work together so that you could leverage each other's strengths and help each other's weaknesses. It was quite amazing.
Good.
I just want to say that one thing that was unique about Diebold that I don't see in a lot of places that I go into is that you have somebody like Scott who's an executive, right? He's an executive, right? You're an executive, right? Would you? I mean, even though we're friends, I mean, you're an executive. Okay, he's an executive. Okay. Even though I was in his office in boxers, but I've done that a lot too. But yeah. But one thing that was interesting with Scott was Scott wasn't my boss. He was a friend, and he was somebody that I could go to in the event that something happened. And I took those same concepts and applied those to Trusted Sec and to binary defense and to everything that I've done, where I'm not the boss of Trusted Sec. I'm not the CEO. I'm not the founder. I'm not anybody else. I'm somebody that you can come and talk to and we can joke around with and have a good time with, but we also get stuff done. You know that I have your back no matter what. And I learned that from Scott. I learned that from the team, and everybody on the team had that same opinion. So your leadership is really critical to your success in your organization. If you don't have leadership that you can go to that they implicitly trust you for your direction and support you and figure out ways to get you to be successful and to mentor you, then it's time to move to a different place. Because leadership is everything in those types of scenarios. And I'll tell you the funny story about that board meeting. Scott was the CIO at the time. He got promoted, and I was the CISO. And I was going to present in front of the board. And it was my first time as Chief Security Officer of being in charge of them. And Scott's like, hey, just show up at this time. The board will be ready for it and everything else. And my team decides, out of all days, that they would fill my entire car with that old mainframe paper. And it leaves these white remnants everywhere. It's like literally like I was a snowball at the end of the day. And so I get in my car, and I don't have time to clean this stuff out of my car. Ryan, I know I'm looking at you too, man. You're part of that. You're guilty. He was guilty. Yeah, he was involved in that. Ryan over here, by the way, you talk about talent, was working in IT, had a passion to do something, brought him into security, and was one of the best hires we've ever had. And so get over into the car, and I got mainframe paper flying all around me. I'm in a suit. I'm completely in white. And it's like it rubbed all completely over me. And it was a dark suit, a blue suit.
Do you have a tie on?
I had a tie on.
Did you have to borrow one?
Didn't have to borrow a tie. Not this. I had to borrow a tie one time. I forgot about that too. But I get to the board meeting, and Scott looks at me, and he's like, "What in the? Never mind. Just go. You're fine." He's like, "Just go." And I'm like, "What am I supposed to do?" I'm like, I'm sitting here like this, and it's making it worse. Like it just, I was like literally in all white, and presented in front of a board as a snowball. So it was amazing. So, but friendship, leadership, all of those come into play. And if your leadership isn't approachable to be able to do what you need to or to bounce ideas off of, Scott recognizes when I'm going down a lane and he can understand the basic concepts of what I'm talking about, maybe not the technical pieces of it, but he understands the basic concepts of what I'm talking about and knows that's the right direction and supports me on that. And that's leadership 101 right there.
Do they want to ask questions?
Yeah, does anybody want to ask questions, by the way?
Excellent. No.
All right, that's fine.
As you can tell, another skill is storytelling, right? So, and I'm trying to impart value to you, so I'm going to I'll be the boring one again. I think another thing it's one thing to develop as a leader, it's another thing as you're doing that, to develop the leaders that work for you or work with you. And that can be a challenging thing, and that's why you have to have trust, you have to have confidence. And I've always, follow the rule, hire people that are way smarter than you so that you do trust. And my job was always another thing that would impress the business, the guys that run the business, is do the right projects at the right time. And that's all on us, because they don't know what are necessarily the right projects at the right time. But we do. And, and in developing folks underneath you, what I always tried to do is put my folks in the right place at the right time. And I would push them. I would push them off the curb. I would make them uncomfortable because I trusted them. And we always got things done. The volume of work that the teams that I build because of those kind of principles always outperformed any of the other organizations within the respective company because of that. So right projects at the right time. And we all know that, right? We all know when we're doing something that probably should be a little lower priority. It's up to you to voice that. The credit that you will get will enable you to do things that are almost unheard of. And I'm the last thing I'll say, the confidence that this team built at Diebold allowed us to do some remarkable things on an operational perspective. But I'll tell you what, it was all tested one day when there was a global hack of ATMs, and it was a Diebold ATM. I mean, this was no kids' play. This ended up having us travel all over the world.
Was that when I was in Thailand?
I don't know where you were. You could have been. And the approach was at the time, so then you heard the board and the CEO, they came to me and said, what are we going to do? And I was the only one with this approach. All the other executive vice presidents, which were above me, wanted to do something different. I said, we are going to go public with this breach. We are going to take away all of the press's ability to attack us. Mm-hmm. And at the time, that was unheard of. And no one wanted to do that except for me. And I convinced the CEO and the board because they believed in us. And it was very, very effective. We went out there, we pushed it, took away all of their negative publicity, and it was successful. We really did not, our market share didn't really have an impact, and we did some incredible things. And the only way you get to do that is by instilling a level of confidence that only a team can bring. Because, I knew that we were going to be able to pull these things off. I knew that I would let David maybe go a little bit off path, because if I had confidence, if something kind of bad happens, we have the ability to correct it very, very quick. And if I didn't have that type of trust, you think I would have let him do half the things he did? Hell no. But we did. And comprising a team that all benefit and play off of one another and made us as a whole, one pretty incredible team. That's what you do, and that's when you generate value. That's when your budgets aren't denied. That's when you get to do really cool things that make it easy for you to recruit and retain, help you develop. If you don't do all of these things, you end up getting stuck, kind of in an organization that you don't have control over. The people that don't understand and necessarily appreciate all the value that you bring. So, courageous authenticity is what I call it. And I challenge all of you to be very courageous in what you do. I challenge all of you to learn the business that you live in, because they're different. And it will change every time you go. You do those things, and especially if you aspire to lead, and you will be successful. I've tested this. I've applied it at 5 different global organizations, and we've been able to do things that none of my predecessors were able to do. Basic stuff.
Yeah. Let me just quickly say along those lines is that as a security professional, there are going to be times, they say our industry is negative 20% employment rate, so you can jump around all over the place. You can always get another job. You can always get more money. Don't do that. Don't do that. Know that there are times you need to accomplish something where you are. And just because it's hard and just because people oppose you doesn't mean that you shouldn't stay there and actually accomplish that thing that you need to accomplish. And you may have to say and do things that are really not good for your career, but they're good for the company. Those are the things that will propel you to the next level.
Yeah, I agree. I think that over the years, I know that when I left Diebold and came to Lincoln, I really wanted it to be a situation that I could emulate someday a security team. And I didn't go into security at Lincoln. I started off on systems development and as Scott had mentioned, I agree. I think that being the CIO, you're much more impactful. Being able to direct security, being in charge of systems development, I helped to bridge that gap to make sure that my systems developers knew there wasn't an option. They had to be supportive of the security. Now doing the information security and doing infrastructure, it's been nice to make sure that the teams don't have competing agendas, and they know the key principles that they have to follow, in making sure that we're growing our program and everybody wins. But with that, I think that the most important thing comes down to the people in that organization. I'm personally proud that I feel like I've emulated a portion of what we had at Diebold. I'm hoping my team will at some point in time think the same, have the same type of respect and feel the same just devotion that I felt being there. But it has been a true message all along that there will come a time when they will outgrow my company and they will outgrow our program. And when they do, I think that that's the real dialogue that you can have. And being that this is such a small community, we all should think about those things because there's huge opportunity for everyone. And it's not always the right fit. And to the point, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes you got to learn how to water and grow your own grass. And it's definitely a journey.
I talked about a lot of the fun and games because I think it's important to understand having fun is important. But at the end of the day, it was a very serious, thing that we were accomplishing at the organization. We had fun while doing it, right? And what was interesting is I tend to go more towards humor and fun and joking and things like that, just kind of my personality of who I am. But at the end of the day, I knew that I could rely on everybody with me, that we were all allies kind of working for the same goal. And I learned and I grew so much from a kid that would just want to talk about cracking encryption to being able to present in front of a board of directors and to being a chief security officer of a Fortune 1000 company and being able to present that program and the vision for it and being able to enable my team to then take the leadership. When I left, somebody took my position that was in my team as well. One thing I could say is that loyalty is an amazing concept for human beings, and I can still say that I'd probably still be at Diebold to this day if Scott was still there. But I also probably wouldn't have started Trusted Sec or Binary Defense or grown the way that I have, and started Derbycon was already started, but because of Scott. But I wouldn't have done all those things. And it was interesting when I started Trusted Sec. I was the chief security officer of Diebold, had a great team, a great program, had nothing to worry about. My job was perfectly stable. Everything was fantastic. Had an amazing team. And I went home one day and I'm like, man, I think I can build this for other companies and help other companies out. And I'm not sure if I want to do this for this one company my entire life. Maybe it's time to let somebody else lead this team and to run forward. And I went to my wife one day and she had just given birth to twins, which is a great time to start a brand new company, by the way. Amazing. And I actually called Scott and I said, Scott, I'm looking at doing this. And he said, Dave, I think he said David. He says David all the time. David, he's like, I think that's an amazing idea. And he's like, I know that you're going to be successful in anything that you do. He's like, go for it. And whatever I can do to help you out, just let me know. We're still a team. And that day I decided to start Trusted Sec. And it's been an amazing ride ever since then. He gave me my first contract. The very first customer I ever had was Scott's company at the time, and worked with them for a number of times until I can get on my feet. And that alone was insurmountable. So when I talk about Scott and this team being the foundation for my success and my career and everything else, I mean it. The team that we had there, the things that I learned, all came from a team that was willing to do anything to accomplish a goal. And that goal was making our company, our organization, our customers better, and working with other people to go and do it. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, question.
Is there any one story that you can tell about Diebold days that they wouldn't believe?
One story that they wouldn't believe.
That who wouldn't believe?
That you guys just didn't know, never knew about that we can share with you now.
No, I mean they knew most. I mean, I would do we'd do like jokes and stuff. Like I put like crickets in their office. Like it was like a random cricket sound that would come every like 10 minutes in random intervals. That was fun. Scott, the second week I worked there, I called Jess and I'm like, hey, am I gonna get fired if I lockpick Scott's office and I build a fort out of cardboard? And she's like, no, this actually sounds like a good idea. So we lockpicked his door. built a fort, had like a castle and everything. He had a shield and a sword. It was pretty awesome. There were certain ones that we did where, there was one, I don't think to this day Stacy knows about it, but there was a guy named Stacy Gregerson, and we took apart his keyboard, and we soldered a Tinsy device to it, and it would randomly move his mouse up to the left and start randomly clicking at random intervals. And it was his keyboard doing it, so it didn't look like keys that were generating. And I forgot about it, and I went on a business trip for 2 weeks. And I came back, and Stacy was like literally ready to quit. And he's like, I've replaced my laptop, I've replaced my mouse, I've replaced my monitor, nothing's working. He never replaced the keyboard because it was the mouse that was doing it the entire time. He's like, I've replaced everything. He's like, I literally want to kill anybody and so I had to call Stacy in my office at the time, like, hey Stacy, I got to talk to you about something really important. I had Josh switch his keyboard out with a legitimate one at the time and disable the Tinsy device so that we did it. So there's some pranks that can go awry, but I think.
There is one. So I don't know if you remember this. There was, so I probably shouldn't say this, but
Go ahead.
there was one. Yeah, we did survive. We're not there anymore. So there was one thing. We were also a little creative in our education and awareness program, and Scott had made the decision. I don't know who suggested it to him, but we had a board meeting coming up. So we figured we'd test it out by putting CDs all over the hotel where the executives were going to be so that we could test whether or not they would install them in their laptops. And unfortunately, it was probably like 80% of them did it, right? And I don't think you were there yet.
I was at that meeting. I was the one that deployed the CD.
Okay, so yeah.
I was working on behalf of this guy.
Yeah, so he was working as a contractor. He was still with the other company. And we got him back, and I think it was such a situation because they said something about pictures. Like, these were the pictures from the prior day, which, by the way, there was nobody there to take pictures. So why they would think that there was pictures, I have no idea. But it was all about the pictures from the previous day. And so we get these things back, and we're like, oh, this is really bad because, this tells us, like, where the program really is and what we've really got to do. And we all kind of were like, what do we do with this data now? Right? Because we can't.
Maybe we shouldn't tell anybody.
Yeah, maybe, and we didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
You gotta have a funny story.
Oh gosh, I gotta tell this.
Oh, please don't tell the story.
I'm gonna tell. I'm gonna tell.
No.
I'm telling.
If you
No,
tell
I got.
that, then I gotta follow it up with what I did the other day.
Okay. So I'm gonna tell one on you, and you're gonna tell one on him. I'm totally doing this. So my son in high school, they had the Cisco Academy there in his high school, and he went through that, and I got him an internship at Diebold. He's like 17 years old, tall kid, but 17, right? And he's working in the networking department for Diebold. And we had these little tiny booths for contractors. It was like where they sat. It was like just bigger than a keyboard, right? And he sat there, and right on the other side of the wall was Jess's cube, right? So he heard a lot of stuff, right? And so he comes down to my area, and he goes, "Hey, Dad, come in here. Come in here." And we walk in the conference room, and he goes, "Dad, I got to tell you what happened." He goes, I was at my desk, and Jess was screaming at this guy on the phone. And I think he was one of the vice presidents. And she was saying, "Get down here right now." And I didn't want to hear this, so I was just going to sneak out, and I went around, and Jess came out of her cube and went, "Oh, hi, Derek. how are you, honey?" He goes, "I think she's crazy." And I said, no, that's just Jess. Everything's okay.
2 minutes.
All right.
2 minutes.
Can I tell it or not?
Which one? Which one is it?
The text. The text from BDS.
Oh yeah, go for it.
All right.
Yeah.
So this is recent. I mean, this is like in the last month. So we recently, yeah, it's fresh because Dave actually does work for me, right? So we do stuff. Well, his team does. So BDS was doing some stuff for us. We recently had a situation, a small situation. Something didn't get caught. And I send a note to Dave, and I'm like, hey, Dave, this is the situation, what's the case? And he shoots back this email like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. I'm going to make sure that I talk to this person. I've already had a discussion. This is terrible. This is unacceptable. And I send him back a text, and I'm like, hey, dude, I think we're overreacting just a little bit.
It's never happened, but in the history of us, Jess and I knowing each other, has never happened.
So I'm like, you might want to just take this as a learning opportunity, and maybe we could talk to the guy about it. And he immediately calls me, and he's like, hey, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, why? I'm like, you just overreact a little bit. He's like, okay, that's not you.
So at the end of the day, I mean, hopefully you learned a lot of lessons on what we did as a team. And I think most importantly, you heard team and people. And you cannot accomplish a security program without a team and without a people and without appropriate leadership. And it's not a product or technology. The technology fits something or initiative that you're trying to accomplish. The people are the ones that support it. And one thing that I think that the team really recognizes is that you can't have new pieces of technology in place when you don't have the people to support that technology or introduce that complexity. And so, for us, it was